I wanted to talk about something that happened to me over the last few days. I don't know if anyone else has found this, but I just seem to be communicating really clearly with what I can only call my higher self, having really long and intense conversations, bringing in this information that, I know couldn't have come from me, from my lower self. And it's just been fascinating because it's almost like all the downloads of information to kind of give us everything that we need to know to continue to expand and to continue to ascend is just coming into us if we're open and if we're ready. So just to give you a little bit of a background to the story about what's happened is, first of all, I took up surfing as a middle-aged female, almost aged 50, which is a pretty sort of surprising decision, considering the fact that I had a wave phobia and had never been in the ocean. But it was something that I felt very strongly impelled to do, and I can see now, looking at it, that it's been, one of the greatest things for controlling fear. Feels like a preparation in terms of me being able to control my mind for whatever's coming. And over the last sort of few weeks, I'd had some really great insights into controlling my mind when I was out in the ocean and I was experiencing fear or anxiety, and it was really just to be still and know I am God. I actually got that from one of Joseph Benner's books, and I've just found it really, really great. And as I've been saying that, I've actually started to have these insights where I'm realizing that it's not actually me doing the surfing, that I am just an experience, an expression of all that is when I'm out there surfing, and anything that happens to me out there actually has nothing to do with me. And it's actually been really empowering. It's allowed me to surrender and just trust that whatever's happening is perfect. So leading into this thing that happened over the last few days, I was really of the mindset that I'm not the one out there surfing, I'm just the expression of that. And then the other day, I was out in the vegetable garden and I was pruning one of our beautiful tomato plants that's been producing so much fruit, like a lot of fruit. And I was just sort of tidying it up because it was getting a bit sort of out of control. And I snipped off this stalk. And as soon as I snipped it, my heart dropped because at the time, it was very hard to tell because it was all intertwined, but I actually was thinking that I had chopped off the root of this tomato plant and that I had actually killed the whole thing. And I love this tomato plant, I felt so terrible. I didn't know what I'd actually done because it was all tangled up. So I just decided to go upstairs and just let it be and see what died and see what stayed, if anything. And that evening I was really in this kind of state of regret and feeling terrible that I had, chopped down this beautiful, abundant tomato plant that had been giving us so much. And I heard this voice in my head. And it was like, well, you think that you're not the one surfing, so why do you think you're the one who chopped the tomato plant? And I'm just going, what? And it was really interesting because what followed was very much saying the information about how nothing is an accident and everything is orchestrated. So, the messages that I was getting was that it wasn't an accident that this tomato plant had been cut and that it happened perfectly, and that everything that happens is perfectly designed for us and our continual awakening to this whole process of whatever we're going through. And that was a bit of a mind spin because, at the time I was feeling terrible about cutting this tomato plant, and then it was like, oh my God, it's not that I didn't do it, it's just it's one, and it happened, and it had to happen for a reason because it had to happen for me so that I could learn from it, which I did. So it was interesting because following on from this this kind of voice in my head just came this whole stream of information about why we're here. So just to give you a brief outline of this, it's very hard to explain, but basically everything is if we use the law of correspondence, which is that everything that happens in our reality is what happens everywhere. So everything in our reality starts as an idea. An idea is the basis of everything we see around us, everything that humans produce. So the concept of the idea is that that's the source. And what that means is that humans are an idea. They're an idea from God. And that what that means is that because all ideas are in the mental plane, that means that our natural state of being is in the mental plane. We aren't this body. We aren't these emotions. What we are is a point of awareness where we can focus awareness in the mental plane. And that's it. That's the origin of the human being. I'm not saying that's the origin of us, our spiritual selves, but that's the origin of human. We are a thing in the mental plane. So I thought that was pretty cool. So then kind of came this whole stream of ideas about the path that humans are taking. So if we look at this idea, I mean, the idea is basically that God or the creator or, the universe or source had an idea that they wanted to create a world, and in that world would be beings that were made in its form, in that they too could create. So we see this whole process of, the formation of the idea of, the planet, the mineral kingdom, and then the idea of the vegetable kingdom, then the animal kingdom. And we see this flow through to more complexity and more efficiency that we call evolution, but really is like a process of creation that's leading to this whole thing about having beings on this planet who can create in the image of God. So humans came along as the first beings that had awareness, because up until that point, the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdom, they didn't have awareness. They were creating, but they had no awareness that they were creating. They were basically just expressions of God and God's ideas at the time. So now suddenly we've come along and we've got awareness of this creative process. Well, maybe so much of awareness of ourselves and awareness of the world around us. So in the beginning, and I guess this is what they call the Garden of Eden, we're basically saying that humans at that time were just expressing, just like the animal kingdom and the other kingdoms, we were just expressing what God's idea was. But the problem is, if you're connected so fully to source and to all that is, then there's no desire, there's no need to do anything because you have everything. So that's where separation started. It was like we became separate for a specific reason. It wasn't by accident. It was that the only way for us to develop this thing called desire was to be separate from source. Because if we're separate from everything that is, then we would desire to have things. If we thought there was lack, if we thought there was, something we needed, then that would create this will, this desire, which is really what's needed to be a creator. Without that will, I mean, we're just continuing to express through God rather than actually have some input into the process ourselves. So I'm kind of likening this whole phase of us developing these skills in the back end, I guess you might say, like developing desire. It's an illusion because we have everything, but it's kind of like we got put into this training ground. Like you could imagine it's kind of like in a video game where you're in this video game and you're learning, how to navigate this video game and learning whatever your avatar's learning in that game. And it's not real, but you learn from it and you learn skills from it that you can then apply to the real you. So that's what I kind of liken it to. So then what happened is, in this illusory video game, is after we developed a desire, you've got the issue where because you're separate, you're just using your desire to create anything, So that's why we see the state of the world. We're actually quite weak creators because we've got, a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of negative emotions and beliefs, and they have to become manifest because it's law that all thought and ideas have to become manifest. So we're very weak creators at this time. Well, I should say when we first started to learn about desire, we were weak creators. And then the next step, I guess, in this plan of us to become creators is the concept of judgment, is that there's a good and there's a bad, so that we could actually start to distinguish the things that we were creating, and that we formulated the ability to label them as good or bad. And so that's all taking place in this, illusory training ground, video game, whatever you might want to call it, where we're learning about judgment. And I mean, judgment, we know that it doesn't really exist. Nothing is really good or bad, but it provided a tool for us to be able to label something, so that as a creator, we had some guidance as to what we wanted to create. So then we had judgment. So the next thing that came along in this illusory game, this illusory training ground, was the concept of free will or choice. So we had to have some sort of free will or choice in order to be able to decide what we wanted to create. So after we've judged it, now it's like, okay, we know it's good or bad, so now let's bring in the ability to choose. So when I look at that, I kind of think of it about in terms of, if I was looking at it from a higher, like from a programmer who was trying to decide what skills they wanted us to learn, it would be to discern between right and wrong thinking. So right thinking being this idea of God and love and peace and beauty and joy, and then wrong thinking being, what we might consider service to self, negative emotions. And the thing that allowed us to identify right and wrong thinking was suffering. So anytime that we were choosing wrong thinking, there was always suffering linked to it. So every time we tried to do something for ourselves, or hoard, or whatever it was, there's always suffering linked to it. Anything we tried to get from the material world to make us think we're filling in some sort of lack always leads to suffering. But it's when we engage in right thinking that's when we're giving, we're loving, we're caring, we're compassionate, then that tends to lead to peace and calm. So that's what I think's been going on, is that we've been learning about right thinking and wrong thinking so that we can make a choice. And it was interesting because when I was kind of seeing this information, I got the idea of like this switch in my mind, that not even in my mind, but on the mental plane. And it's like sometimes when I sit out there and I'm surfing and I start to get panicked or, anxious, and I've learned to just do this kind of thing where I just go, no, be still. And there's like this switch goes across in my mind, and I can feel it now. And it goes immediately from this low vibration to immediately to this place of just stillness and higher vibration. So I'm starting to see the difference between, the right and wrong thinking at the time, which is really interesting. And I know that with the wrong thinking that it leads to suffering, because I know that as a result of my fear out in the surf, I've had, accidents and things, and I always have them when I'm afraid. When I'm in peace, then everything just seems to be in flow and go smoothly. So that was kind of the insights that came from that. And all I can see now is that, now that we've kind of got these skills to be creators, we're learning about right thinking, and we're seeing the results of our suffering in the world around us, is that now we're being called to reconnect. And as we learn more skills and as we reconnect, then our creative abilities are growing, and we're tapping into all of our spiritual gifts and, all these things we think that we've all been wanting to develop in ourselves are all starting to come online. But it has to be in terms of the process that we've been going through. So there's this yearning just for something. Some of us think it's this yearning for purpose, this yearning for whatever it is, but really at the end of the day, this yearning is to reconnect to source, so that now we've got the skills, we can be a conduit for the ideas that come from God that are actually our ideas. In fact, none of our thoughts or ideas are ours, they all come from God. and to then be able to express these with awareness and just be the experience. So the way I kind of think about this is like a link back to the human body. Like in the human body, there are cells. Now the cells are all tapped into their version of God, which I guess is our mind, which is giving them instructions. They're not questioning the instructions. They are doing what they're designed to do. They are simply receiving information from their God and they are expressing it. And in a way, that's the way I kind of see humans are cells for Gaia, and we're doing the same thing. We're all being brought online as a single organism, all connected into the one God or source, and all channeling the ideas and the thoughts from God to then create that on Gaia, which is the new human on the new 5D Earth. So it's funny how an experience of chopping down a tomato plant could actually bring this through, because just to finish up back on the tomato plant story is that during the night I was also getting the message saying everything's going to be fine. And why do you think you chopped the tomato plant? What were you thinking about tomatoes? And when I reflected on that, I was reflecting on the fact that I was always thinking, oh my gosh, we have so many tomatoes. What are we going to do with them? We have to give them away. We have to make stuff out of them. I was always coming from the place that there's too many tomatoes. So no surprise, when I woke up the next day and I went down to have a look at the tree, all I'd done is cut one of the side branches, and I could see the one that had been cut because it had wilted. And when I pulled that wilted branch away and unentangled it and left what was left and still alive and flourishing, was that I still had a beautiful tomato plant that had been perfectly pruned, less tomatoes, still extremely healthy and productive, but it was exactly what I'd been putting out there, just in a way that I could never imagine. So the tomato plant incident, something seemingly so insignificant, was perfectly orchestrated for me to get to a deeper level of awareness about what's going on. And I feel so extremely blessed and grateful that that happened. And I think that things like that are happening to a lot of us. So use all these things in our life that seemingly bring up negative emotions and negative thoughts, and realize that they're just perfectly orchestrated to show us our next step. It's so beautiful. So anyway, it was a bit of a ramble. I hope you got something out of it, and thanks for listening.